My name is Delaney Ruth Corbin. I'm 36 years old. On June 10, 2016, at 7:40 in the evening, I sat at the long table in the back room of the Holland House on South Main Street in Bellefontaine, Ohio, at my own rehearsal dinner, and watched my mother stand up before the salads came out. She didn't raise her voice. My mother never raised her voice. Diane Corbin believed volume was for people without options. You can love who you want, Delaney, she said. You just can't bring him to my table. 41 people heard her. My father, Wendell, studied the water ring under his glass. My sister Kimberly, who was 24 then and 8 months into a marriage my mother had paid for, looked at her lap and smiled the way you smile at a joke you're not supposed to laugh at. Marcus stood up. He had been standing up for me since our second date, and he was about to do it again, and I put my hand flat on his forearm and he sat back down. My mother wasn't finished. I'm not raising grandbabies, I'd have to explain at church. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't ask her what she meant, because I already knew, and because asking would have given her one more sentence. I set my fork down on the folded napkin. I squared it so the handle lined up with the edge of the table. Then I reached into the pocket of my dress and closed my hand around a brass key on a loop of orange baling twine, and I held it until the metal was as warm as my own skin. My grandmother had pressed that key into my palm 4 hours earlier. What my mother didn't know, what none of them knew, and wouldn't know for 9 more years, was that the key opened a back door on 41 acres my mother had already spent in her head. And that the woman who gave it to me had left instructions. Before I tell you what happened when my mother showed up on my porch 9 years later, begging, please take a second to like and subscribe. Drop your city and local time in the comments below. I love knowing where in the world you're listening from right now. I grew up at 818 Cherry Bend Road, 3 miles outside Bellefontaine, in a white 2-story house with a wraparound porch my father never finished painting. My grandmother, Ruth Corbin, lived in the smaller house at the end of the same gravel lane, the one everybody called the back place, because it sat behind the tree line where the soybeans started. The math of our family was simple and it was decided before I could read. Kimberly was the pretty one. I was the useful one. Kimberly took dance at Miss Charlene's studio on Detroit Street, $32 a month, and my mother sewed sequins onto her costumes at the kitchen table until midnight. I took whatever was free. I was good at school in a way that embarrassed my mother, because being good at school meant asking questions, and asking questions in that house was a form of disloyalty. When I was 9, I brought home a permission slip for a field trip to Columbus. $12. My mother read it twice and set it on the counter next to the phone bill. Girls like you don't need to see the city, she said. You'll only get ideas about leaving. She was right about that part. My grandmother's kitchen smelled like scorched coffee and lemon oil. She kept the radio on the AM station out of Lima, and she kept a green enamel roasting pan on the back burner year-round, because she said an empty stove looked like a house where nobody loved anybody. She was born in 1933. She had opinions about that. Grandma Ruth is the reason I made it out. Not because she gave me money. She didn't have any then. She gave me the other thing. When I was 11 and my mother wouldn't let me go to the 8th grade honors dinner because Kimberly had a recital the same night, I walked the gravel lane in the dark and sat on Ruth's back step and didn't say anything for 20 minutes. She came out with 2 cups of coffee, which was scandalous for an 11-year-old, and she sat down beside me on the concrete. Your mother loves you the size she is, she said. That's not the same as the size you need. I said I didn't understand. You will, she said. Don't wait around for her to grow. Grow yourself. I got a scholarship to Ohio State's nursing program in 2007. My mother told the ladies at Cherry Bend Baptist that I was going away to be a nurse's aide, and corrected me in front of them when I said the word bachelor's. My father drove me to Columbus in the F-150 with the bad alternator and said 9 words the entire trip. When he pulled up to the dorm he said, "Don't call collect," which made no sense in 2007, and then he hugged me hard enough that I understood he was apologizing for a life he didn't have the vocabulary to apologize for. I met Marcus Boyd in October 2013, in a hospital cafeteria in Columbus, over a broken soda machine. He was 27, a structural engineer doing bridge inspections for the state, in the building to look at a parking deck. He had a laugh you could hear through 2 floors. He had a mother in Dayton who called him every Sunday at 4 and a grandfather who'd worked 41 years at Delco and retired with a pension and a handshake. He was patient in a way I had never once been shown. The first time I brought him home, in March 2014, I called ahead. I did that on purpose. I wanted the cruelty to be a decision and not a surprise, because I was already building a case in my head, the way you do when part of you knows how the story ends. My mother met us in the driveway. She did not open the door. Now's not a good time, Delaney. Behind her, through the storm door, I could see the table set for 4. Marcus said, "Ma'am, it's nice to finally." "You seem like a nice young man," she said, and she said it to me, not to him. "This isn't about you." That is the sentence I want you to remember, because it's the one she'd build the next decade on. This isn't about you. My mother spent her whole life insisting her cruelty was about principle, or church, or what people would say, or what the neighbors on Cherry Bend had been through, anything but the plain, small, ugly thing it was. Marcus drove us to a Bob Evans off Route 33 and ordered me a coffee and didn't say a single bitter word. That's when I knew. The wedding was set for June 11, 2016, at the Logan County Fairgrounds Pavilion, because it cost $400 for the day and Marcus's uncle knew the man who rented it. My grandmother was 83. She had a walker with tennis balls on the feet and a hip that had been replaced twice. She rode 40 minutes in the passenger seat of Marcus's cousin's Impala to be at my rehearsal, and she was the only Corbin who sat on my side of that back room at the Holland house. For hours before my mother stood up and said what she said, Ruth caught my wrist in the parking lot. She put that brass key in my hand and folded my fingers over it. "Back door," she said. "It sticks. Lift and pull." I laughed and said I wouldn't need a key, I'd be in Michigan. "You'll need it," she said. "Not this year." I've thought about that sentence maybe 4,000 times since. We got married on a Saturday at 11 in the morning with 68 people there, 49 of them Marcus's. My grandmother sat in the front row in a lavender dress and cried in a way she'd have denied under oath. My parents did not come. My sister sent a card with a gift receipt for a blender she never actually bought. At 9:13 that night, my mother sent a text message. I still have it. I've never deleted it. You made your choice. Don't make us live with it. That was the last thing Diane Corbin said to me for 9 years, 2 months, and 28 days. We moved to Ann Arbor, Michigan, in August 2016 with $21,840 in a joint savings account and a used Corolla with 141,000 miles on it. I took a job in labor and delivery at a hospital I'd never set foot in, night shift, because night shift paid a differential of $4.75 an hour and we needed it. Here's the part nobody makes videos about: it was hard, and it was ordinary, and it was good. We rented a duplex on Pauline Boulevard for $1,100 a month. Marcus went back to school 2 nights a week and got his PE license in 2018. Our son Theodore was born on March 22, 2019, 6 weeks after my grandmother died, which I'll come back to. Our daughter came September 4, 2022, and we named her Ruth, and we call her Ruthie, and she is loud in exactly the way her great-grandmother was quiet. By 2025 I was the charge nurse on days, making $94,000 a year. Marcus had left the state and gone in with 2 partners on a firm doing bridge and culvert inspection contracts across 3 counties. We bought a house on Chalmers Drive in the fall of 2021 for less than it's worth now, with a maple in the front yard that turns the color of a stoplight every October. 9 years. Nobody called. Not on Theo's birthday. Not when I mailed the announcement in 2019, addressed in my own handwriting, and got it back with return TO sender written across it in my mother's Palmer method cursive. Grandma Ruth died on February 3, 2019, at 6:32 in the morning, at Mary Rutan Hospital, with pneumonia and a heart that had simply done its work. I was 34 weeks pregnant and I drove down anyway, and I was not told about the funeral until it was over. My mother handled the arrangements. My mother handled everything. And that is where the 9 years of quiet came from, because I believed what I was told. I was told there was nothing. I was told the back place had gone to my father as the only son, and that the 41 acres had been mortgaged twice in the 80s, and that Grandma Ruth had died with a checking account of $3,100 and a burial policy. I believed it because grief makes you lazy about arithmetic, and because a part of me was still 9 years old and still believed my mother when she told me what I was owed. If you've ever been written out of a story by the person who was supposed to be telling it, type Ruth in the comments. I want to know we're not alone in this. On October 9, 2025, at 4:15 in the afternoon, my mother knocked on my front door in Ann Arbor. I hadn't seen her in 9 years. She'd shrunk. That's the thing nobody warns you about. The people who loomed over your childhood get small, and it doesn't feel like victory, it feels like vertigo. She was 66. She was wearing a beige raincoat I recognized, which meant she hadn't bought a coat in a decade. Theo was at the kitchen table doing a worksheet about the water cycle. Ruthie was asleep. Marcus was in the driveway with the hood of the truck up. "Delaney," she said. "I need help." I stood in the doorway and I did not step back to let her in. I want to be honest with you about that. It wasn't strategy. My body just wouldn't do it. She told me my father had died on July 28, 2024. 15 months earlier. Nobody had called me. She told me it fast, the way you rip off a bandage on someone else's arm. She told me the farm was going to auction. The house at 818 Cherry Bend, the barn, the 41 acres. There was $63,500 in back taxes and penalties owed to Logan County, and an $86,000 home equity line my parents had taken out in 2013 that my father had stopped paying in 2022 when the cancer got expensive. The sheriff's sale was set for November 14 at 10 a.m. on the courthouse steps. Then she said the thing she'd driven 210 miles to say. "I need $118,000. I didn't answer. Behind me, Theo asked if the lady wanted a juice box, and I said not right now, buddy, and closed the storm door partway so he couldn't hear. My mother's face did something I'd never seen it do. It reorganized. The soft part fell away and the old part came up underneath it, and she said, quietly, in that same voice from the Holland house. "I'm still your mother. That's a debt, not a favor." I said, "I'll think about it." She said, "Don't take too long. And Delaney, I'd rather people down there didn't know where the money came from." 9 years, and she was still worried about the neighbors. I closed the door. I stood in my own front hall in my own house and I did not cry, and Marcus came in with grease on his hands and looked at my face and said, "Okay. Okay. Sit down." Here's what I did next, and it wasn't dramatic. On October 10, I called the Logan County Auditor's Office and asked for the parcel history on 818 Cherry Bend Road. It cost me $11 and a 40-minute hold. The 41 acres and both houses were not titled to Wendell Corbin. They were titled to the Ruth E. Corbin Revocable Living Trust, dated October 6, 2015. I sat in my car in the hospital parking garage on level 3 and read a public record on my phone and felt the floor of 9 years give out underneath me. The trust attorney was listed as Harold Grieve. Of Grieve and Nussbaum, 212, West Columbus Avenue, Bellefontaine. I called at 10:47 the next morning. He was 71 years old and still going in 3 days a week, and when I said my name there was a pause on that line long enough that I thought the call had dropped. "Delaney," he said. "I have been trying to find you since February of 2019. He'd sent 2 certified letters. Both went to 818 Cherry Bend Road, because that was the last address my grandmother had for me. She'd never gotten my Michigan address written down right, she'd only ever called. Both were signed for. He had the green cards in the file. The signature on both was D. Corbin. Diane. Not Delaney. Grandma Ruth had amended her trust on October 6, 2015, 8 months before my wedding, 3 weeks after I called and told her I was engaged and that my mother wasn't speaking to me. She left my father a life estate in the main house. He could live there until he died, and he did. She left Kimberly $10,000. The 41 acres, the back place, the barn, and the remainder interest in everything went to me. Sole successor beneficiary. Sole successor trustee. And there was a letter. Sealed, in Harold's file, unopened since 2015. He read me one line over the phone, and then he stopped, because he said the rest I should read myself. The line was, "Don't wait around for her to grow." The back taxes and the equity line weren't my grandmother's debts. They were my parents', a loan taken against a house they had a life estate in, which is a thing a bank should have caught and didn't. When my father died, the life estate died with him. As of July 28, 2024, the property had belonged to me. My mother had been living in my house for 15 months, letting the taxes run, and had driven to Michigan to ask me to buy back something I already owned. Harold Grieve filed to stop the sheriff's sale on October 24. Because the delinquency was mine to cure as record owner, I wired $63,500 to Logan County on October 27 at 2:02 p.m. The equity line was another conversation, and the bank's lawyer stopped returning calls fast once Harold sent them a copy of the 2015 trust. I never told my mother any of it. She called me 11 times between October 9 and November 13. I let everyone go to voicemail. On the last one she said, "You always were a spiteful child," and I saved that one too. The sheriff's sale was still on the courthouse calendar as a formality until it was formally struck, and my mother didn't know that either. She went to the Logan County Courthouse on November 14, 2025, at 10 in the morning, and she brought an audience. I know that because I was standing across the street in front of the Court Street Diner at 9:40, with Harold Grieve, 71, in a gray overcoat, and Marcus in a suit, and a manila folder. There were maybe 30 people on those steps. Roy Teagarden, 54, the auctioneer, in a canvas jacket with a clipboard. Pastor Kenneth Duffy from Cherry Bend Baptist, 58, who had baptized me in 1998. Arletta Sims, 68, who'd farmed the ground next to ours for 4 decades and used to send my grandmother tomatoes in an ice cream bucket. My sister Kimberly, 33, in sunglasses on a cloudy day. Kimberly's daughter Sydney, 14, who I had never met, standing 3 feet behind her mother with her hands in her sleeves. My mother had told them all a story. I heard the tail end of it as we crossed the street. My own daughter. Sitting up in Michigan in a 4-bedroom house. Won't lift a finger for her mother. Then she saw me. I'll tell you what I felt, and it wasn't triumph. It was a kind of terrible calm, like the second before a wave lands. I didn't say anything. I've thought about why. I think it's because I'd used up all my words on her when I was younger, and none of them ever landed, and I'd finally learned that the only thing that lands is paper. Pastor Duffy said my name, gently, like a question. My mother turned to the crowd, and she made her last mistake, and she made it in her Sunday voice. She married out, she said. She doesn't get to buy back in. Nobody laughed. That's the moment the temperature changed. 30 people on a courthouse step in November, and every one of them heard exactly what she'd said, out loud, in daylight, with no Holland House backroom to hold it. Arletta Sims said, "Diane." Just that. Her name. Harold Grieve stepped forward with the folder and handed a copy to Roy Teagarden. He said, in a voice that had spent 50 years in county courtrooms, "There's no sale today. Parcel 34-021-00, Cherry Bend Road, was removed from the docket on October 24. Delinquency was cured October 27 by the record owner. My mother said, "The record owner is me." "No, ma'am," Harold said. "The record owner is the Ruth E. Corbin Revocable Living Trust. Successor trustee is Delaney Ruth Boyd. Has been since February 3, 2019. My mother laughed. "One syllable. That's not possible." Harold laid the certified mail receipts on top of the folder like he was dealing cards. 2 green cards. February 19, 2019. March 4, 2019. Signed, both times, in handwriting that everyone standing on those steps had seen on church directories and casserole dishes and Christmas cards for 30 years. Pastor Duffy leaned in and looked at them. He didn't say anything for a second. Then he took his glasses off, which is what that man does instead of swearing. "Diane," he said. "Is that your signature?" She said, "This isn't about that." And there it was. This isn't about that. 9 years, and she was still handing me the same sentence with a different coat on. Roy Teagarden clipped his pen to his board and said, "Folks, that's it. No sale." Then he said to me, "Ma'am, I'm sorry for the trouble," and he tipped his head, and he walked down the steps past my mother like she was weather. Kimberly took her sunglasses off. She said, "Mom, you told us there was nothing. You told us at the funeral there was nothing." My mother said, "There was nothing for you." That is the sentence that finished her. Not mine. Hers. She said it to her golden child, on public property, in front of her pastor, because when the mask goes, it doesn't go politely. Arletta Sims said, loud enough to carry, "Ruth would be ashamed of you." Then she came over and hugged me, this woman who had grown soybeans next to my childhood, and she smelled like ivory soap, and she said into my ear, "Your grandmother talked about you every single week." I finally spoke. I said 8 words to my mother, and they were the only 8 I'd rehearsed. "You can have until the 1st of March. She stared at me. I said, "That's more than you gave me." She started to cry then, the loud kind, the kind she'd spent her whole life telling me was for people without options. Kimberly did not go to her. Pastor Duffy took her elbow and walked her to her car, and I watched my mother get folded into the passenger seat of a Buick by a man who had known her for 40 years and could not look at her. I didn't stay to watch her leave the parking lot. I had somewhere to be. Marcus drove and I read my grandmother's letter in the car on Cherry Bend Road with the heat on. It was 1 page, front only, in ballpoint, in that shaky slanted hand. She wrote that she'd known since 2014. She wrote that she'd met Marcus once, in a Bob Evans parking lot in March, when I didn't know she'd driven herself there, and that she'd watched him open my car door and she'd turned around and gone home satisfied. She wrote, "I could not make your mother be decent. I could only make sure she could not take the ground out from under you." And at the bottom, the back door sticks. Lift and pull. Love, Grandma. My mother moved out on February 24, 2026, 6 days early. She left the house clean, which I did not expect, and she left the good dishes, which I did. She lives in Kimberly's finished basement in Springfield now. Cherry Bend Baptist asked her to step back from the flower committee, that's how they phrase it down there, and Pastor Duffy wrote me a letter in December that I have not answered and probably will. There was no arrest. I want to be honest, because these stories always end with handcuffs and mine didn't. Harold said we could pursue it. Certified mail fraud, conversion, a fiduciary claim. He was 71 and he was itching. I said no. Here's why. Not forgiveness. I'm not there and I may never be. It's that a lawsuit would have kept her in my life for 2 more years, and there is no amount of justice worth 2 more years of my mother in my calendar. We rent the 41 acres to Arletta Sims's grandson on a cash lease. It runs $12,300 a year and it goes into an account for Theo and Ruthie. The back place is my grandmother's house, we fix the roof and the wiring, and we go down 4 or 5 weekends a year. Marcus put a swing on the maple. Ruthie is 3 and calls it a Grandma Ruth's house, and I have decided never to correct her. The redemption thread, because there is one, and it's small. In April, I got a message on Instagram from Sydney Holloway, 14, my sister's daughter, who I met for 11 minutes on a courthouse step. It said, "Hi. I don't really know you. But I heard what Grandma said about your husband and it made me feel sick. I'm sorry nobody said anything for 9 years." I wrote back. We text about once a week. She wants to be a vet tech. She came up in June with Kimberly and I sat on my porch for 3 hours and did not fix anything, and that was still more than we'd ever done. Theo is 7 now. He asked me last month why we don't see my mom. I told him the truth in the smallest true words I had, that she loved a rule more than she loved us, and that people are allowed to make that choice, and so are we. Here's what I know at 36, standing in a house I earned twice. Family isn't blood and it isn't a table. It's who holds the door. My mother spent her whole life guarding a door and calling that love, and she guarded it so well that when she finally needed it opened from the other side, there was nobody left inside. My grandmother never argued with her. Not once, in 40 years. She just went quiet and got a lawyer and made sure that when the arguing was over there would still be ground under my feet. Quiet isn't the same as nothing. I spent 30 years thinking it was. On the afternoon of November 14, 2025, at 12:20, I walked around the back of a small house at the end of a gravel lane, past the tree line where the soybeans start, and I took a brass key off a loop of orange baling twine, and I put it in a lock that hadn't turned in 9 years. It stuck. I lifted, and I pulled. And the door opened for me. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever chosen your own life over your family's approval and had to live 9 quiet years to find out you were right, share this video. Someone in your life might need to hear it. Subscribe if you want more stories like this.